If your water breaks during the recording of this episode, we are going to finish recording, right?
I don't believe you for 1 second. Hey, and welcome back to the Whatever is True podcast. I am Bethany here with my husband, Jake.
Hey, everybody.
And today we are finishing up our mini Valentine Day series, which obviously this is coming out after Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, Jake got sick the week of Valentine's Day, and I am full-term pregnant right now, so every day is hit or miss whether I have the energy to record or not. So we apologize that this is coming to you a little bit later, but it's not Valentine's Day themed. We are actually talking about how do we know if we're done having kids, and that is relevant every single day of the year.
Before we hop into that, we just wanted to bring up Samaritan Ministries, our sponsor for today's episode. Guys, it has been a full year and a half since I lost my job. And when that happened, we also lost our health insurance. Now, if you have a family or medical needs, you know how important having insurance is. I have always used the insurance provided by my employer, but when we decided to pursue whatever is true in RV living full time, I knew I needed to find a different option. Thankfully, I found our sponsor, Samaritan Ministries. They are a healthcare sharing ministry. Samaritan Ministries connects hundreds of thousands of Christians across the nation who care for one another spiritually and financially when a medical need arises. It has been the right choice for our family and could be the right choice for your family too.
So some of the things we love about it: one, there are no networks, so you can go to the doctors you trust and the hospitals of your choosing. You'll also have a say in the medical treatments you receive, including natural approaches to your family's care. This last one is so important for our family as we have always been particular with the doctors our children see and providers use during pregnancy. You are part of a Christian community, and when you have a medical need, fellow members send money directly to you to help you pay your medical bills. You do the same for them, all while praying for and encouraging one another. If you're interested in learning more about this amazing ministry, visit SamaritanMinistries.org/wavesandlilacs to learn more. That's SamaritanMinistries.org/wavesandlilacs, and we will put it down in the caption below. I want to say this episode has been a long time coming, but I have sort of avoided it because I do think there is tremendous weight in this topic when we're talking about bringing more children and more souls into the world, or not doing that. And it has felt like a topic that I wasn't quite prepared to tackle. But at the same time, here we are getting ready to welcome our sixth child into the world. And these are conversations that we've been having, we're continuing to have. And so we finally sat down to really research this topic, to take it beyond the conversation portion and to look into what the Bible says about it, and then to also hear from you guys. So if you were on my Instagram page within the last couple weeks, you would have seen several polls and questions relating to this topic. And I wasn't exactly sure what to expect as far as the response and the feedback, but it was so helpful and so eye-opening to me. And I was so appreciative of all of the women who shared their stories. And so I'm going to share with you guys the research first from my stories the other day on Instagram, but then we're going to also, of course, dive into the Bible on this topic. But you'll see how what you guys have said and what the Bible says go together, which is obviously really cool and what we want to happen.
So, like Bethany said, she polled you guys on her Instagram page to find out where everyone was in terms of childbearing. And we got 38% said that they were done having children. 27% said that they were unsure. 31% said currently having kids. And 4% waiting to begin.
Now, there could have been more categories in this, but unfortunately, Instagram limits me to 4. And so I was just trying to get as much of a generalized and broad idea as I could have. Obviously, there are people in other situations, and we're not trying to not include everyone by any means, but just doing as broad of a sweep as we could so that we could give you a picture overall of where most people are in terms of childbearing. Next, we asked you guys, if you are done having children, how did you know that you were done? What determined that you were done? And I did not expect what happened to happen. And as Jake and I scrolled all of the answers, what struck me immediately was how vast the responses were. It was not just somebody saying, oh, like I had the complete feeling, oh, I prayed about it and God just made it clear. It was very specific reason after reason after reason. And we did our best again to try and consolidate all of those into different categories, but I have 14 categories listed in front of me, and that's not encompassing every single situation that came through. It wasn't possible to share all of them. So we're going to go through what came through and was the most common, basically.
Right. We had a lot of overlapping answers or very similar answers.
So number 1, we have contentment, just that feeling of fulfillment, peace, feeling as if your family is complete. And to me, this is the one that I feel I've heard the most about. I don't know, do guys talk about this as much as women do?
Not a whole lot.
Okay, that's fair. This, to me, is the typical answer that I think about or I would expect to experience knowing I'm done. I have heard from and read about so many women just saying, I just knew that we were done. Like my last child was born and our family felt complete. And I have never gotten to that point. I attribute it to like, when you know that so-and-so is the one that you're going to marry. And I didn't know that I knew until I met you, Jake.
Wow, that was good rhyming.
I had never felt that before. And I never understood what people are talking about until I met Jake. And so I've always wondered, well, am I just waiting for that feeling again with our family? And that's why I really appreciate this conversation today and the other 13 reasons we're going to go through. But that is number 1. Number 2 was medical reasons. And obviously we could list a slew of medical reasons here. But 2 of the main ones would be too many C-sections and high-risk pregnancies that are affecting the mom and or the baby.
Yes, and that could also lead to a hysterectomy, which would close that door permanently. So,
here's a reason that isn't necessarily always in your control. I think of, some friends of mine who are pregnant or just had babies and they ended up needing a hysterectomy afterwards just for the safety of them and their baby. And while it may not have been what they would have chosen or wanted, it was what their family needed, for life-saving medical intervention. Number 3 was infertility. And many people talked about secondary infertility. So where they had children or a child previously and then were unable to get pregnant again. And so the desire of their heart was to have more children. But unfortunately, they were unable to have any more.
Number 4 was mental capacity, and I can feel that one. Like, I can understand, like, if you already have children and mentally you do not feel that you could continue giving, the attention and the detail to each individual child that you feel that they need, mentally, I could see that being a reason to not have any more kids.
Well, and I think this one is especially hard because everyone's mental capacity is so different. And you could get stuck in that comparison trap of, well, so-and-so has 10 kids and I'm struggling with my 2 kids. And that's definitely not what we want or anyone should be comparing about, is what the load is. Like, you have no idea the support level between a husband and a wife. You don't know the different personalities of the kids, if there's special needs, if there's how many jobs are being worked, what are the schedules. Like, there's so many different variables and factors that go into that. But I do think, the mental capacity is something to consider as far as, do we have more children?
Right. And I mean, mental capacity could even it will differ between a husband and a wife too. Like, the husband could be mentally tapped out at 2 and the wife could handle 7. But
for sure,
then that comes into something where you and the 2 spouses have to talk about it and come to a conclusion together.
And that's definitely a scenario that I've seen come up, in talking with women. And they say, like, I really want another kid, but my husband really doesn't want another kid. What do we do? So very valid conversations, and lots of prayer needed in that aspect.
And that brings us into number 5, husband's decision or husband not supportive for more children. Now, I mean, that is a really hard situation to be in, but I think for especially Christian couples, that this is one reason it's so important to understand the roles that God has given you, and the submission and the teamwork and being together in decisions is so that you can work through differences of opinions like this one. And if you're a wife that's on the fence about having more kids, you could go one way or the other, but your husband is, set on it, then you can be thankful that God has set up the leadership format that he has given us so that you can just trust your husband in knowing that you are both in God's will. However, if you are set on having more kids and your husband's not, that is just something that you're going to need to pray through, pray for, and just communicate with your husband and really make sure that you are communicating well on the desires of your heart and where you guys feel you should be.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I don't think I can stress enough just asking God to unify your hearts on the matter of how many children you should have, because you don't want to be resentful of your spouse about not having more children. Definitely not resentfully submissive. That is not what the Bible is calling any of us wives to. So I just always encourage solid communication on the matter, but being thankful for those roles, as Jake mentioned, that God has put in place so that you can know, like, I am listening, I am submitting to my husband, and I am trusting God that this is what he has for us right now. The next one, I feel like this could go hand in hand with the mental capacity, but it's just not feeling as if we can handle more. Like, our family is at capacity right now. And again, don't fall into the comparison trap with that one. It's going to vary from family to family. The next one, number 7, is just a clear, definitive answer from God that we are done. And this reminds me actually of, we met a family, another large family on the road while we were RVing. And I don't know how we got into the conversation of being done having children, but they shared with us such an interesting perspective that I had definitely never heard before and have never heard since then. But when they had their last child, and their last child I think was about 5 or 6 at the time.
Yep.
They felt done. And she literally prayed and she said to God, like, please close my womb. And I was like, that is such a different prayer to pray. And they never took any more precautions. They never did anything permanent.
They weren't even tracking on an app or anything. They were just so set that they were done. And after that prayer, they trusted that God had closed her womb. And to our knowledge,
and that was it. Yeah. And so I'm sharing that story as just another perspective. I thought it was something very different and an interesting prayer. But especially, I know there's a lot of people listening who are not in favor of a vasectomy. I'm not going to say anti-vasectomy, but they just don't want to take any permanent procedures to close off the chance of children. And that is an episode that will be coming, not right now. We have a special guest speaker that will be coming to talk on that topic, hopefully, Lord willing, this spring. And I'm really excited to dive into the topic of vasectomies. But sorry, that was a little tangent there.
Real quick, circling back, number 7 to repeat was from God that we are done. And low-key, this is what I want. Like, I want for our marriage is just like God saying, okay, you're done. I don't want the guesswork or anything. Like, this would be the ideal.
All right. Number 8, time to do ministry as a family to others. This was not one of the responses that came in over and over, but we pulled it out because, again, another very interesting perspective that I definitely respect, because I definitely advocate for children being a parent's ministry. And that is true. And it's still true, I'm sure, for this family. Like, their first and foremost ministry is their children and their family. But as your children get older, you have a lot more options and opportunities to be able to serve outside of the home. Right now, I feel very limited. I remember this summer, Jake and I were visiting his parents, and we took the 3 older kids to like a festival nearby while the younger 2 slept. And it was so strange. Like, our kids were so independent. They could go off. They could, like, not away from us necessarily, but they were able to do their own thing. They weren't there needing to be carried or pushed in a stroller. We didn't need to bring a diaper bag. And it was so freeing. And we haven't ever actually, we were just talking about this the other day. We have not been out of diapers in 10 years.
Yeah.
There has been a child in diapers for the last 10 years of our life and our marriage, which we've been married going on for 14 years right now. So the majority of our marriage has been spent changing diapers. And I'm so thankful to be able to do ministry like this on a podcast. And there's definitely forms of ministry that we can do from inside of our home. But just looking at this response and seeing how this family, now that they're done having children and their children are getting older, they can now do more, within their city or their church or wherever God is calling them to. And so I thought that was a very beautiful response, and very intentional.
All right. Number 9 is age. And guys, I feel this one. I am turning 39 in June. We will have a 4-month-old roughly at that point. And I'm feeling it. I'm already feeling it. I'm tired with this 6th child on the way. But not only that, you also have to start looking into how much longer will you be able to have children. So age does take a big factor.
Well, I mean, and there's definitely physical limitations for a woman, as she enters menopause, but that obviously comes at different ages for different women. And so right now, I just turned 37 last weekend, and I am 2 years into what they would consider geriatric pregnancy.
You don't look it.
Thank you. I feel it at the moment. And so I think this is so many people look at it so differently. You have some people who go, okay, like I've hit 35. I'm not having a geriatric pregnancy. I'm done. And then you have this whole movement of women who are just saying, hey, it's fine. We're going to push through, and they're having kids up into their 40s, which I think is amazing.
Yeah. There's no wrong answer here.
Right. And again, don't fall into that comparison trap, because what one woman's body can handle at the age of 40 is not going to be the same as another woman's body at the exact same age.
Yeah. And remember, Sarah was 99, right?
Something like that.
I don't remember the exact age.
Okay. Another popular one was financial reasons. And before we started tonight's episode, Jake and I were talking about this, and we'll actually dive into it a little bit later in the episode as well. But finances are so tricky, and how people view them, how people manage them. One person can say, as long as I have a house over our heads, it doesn't matter how big it is, like it's fine, we're cozy in here. And other people say we need tons more space, and we need all the cars and all the things to have for a family. And so everyone's going to view financial reasons differently. And the main question that we will tackle, though, is like, are you providing adequately for your family?
Yeah, I think this can be overthought a lot. Like, I think people are like, well, each kid needs their own room, or, well, we need to have X amount of dollars in the bank account before we can even think about having another child. And like, that can be a wise thought process, but that shouldn't be the make it or break it for, like, if you're going to have more kids, or if you're going to start having kids. Like, yes, be responsible, but don't let the fear of that stop you either.
Right. There's definitely a faith aspect at play financially, but there's also a common sense aspect as well. So, okay. Number 11, traumatic birth experience or too many losses. And my heart goes out to anyone who has experienced either of these scenarios. And I cannot even imagine the pain or how challenging it must be to move forward in this. And so I understand if you are at this point and you've said, like, my heart cannot take any more, and this is your reason why, like, your family is complete.
That is the hardest one on this list. Like, that is the hardest reason, in my opinion, to say, okay, we're done having children because of this. And like Bethany said, our heart just goes out to those parents that have had to deal with this and go through this. And it's difficult no matter what.
Number 12, stewarding well what we have been given. And for many people, they feel as if they have more children, they will not be able to give the appropriate time and energy towards each child. And so they want to make sure that with what God has given them, they are stewarding those children, discipling those children well with the resources that they have.
All right, number 13, I really like this. And it's just, they didn't have the feeling like anyone was missing anymore. Like, you have your third, fourth, fifth kid, whatever, and then you're just like, oh, we're not missing anyone. Our family's all here. I like that.
Have you ever felt like somebody was missing? Like
No.
at any number of kids?
Nope.
I don't think I've ever felt that either. But again, that's something I hear very often of people going, I just felt like somebody was missing in our family.
I've never heard that before this.
I've just never experienced it. And I've always wondered, what that's like. I mean, I've obviously always thankful for the children that we are given, but I've never felt like anybody was missing until they're
unless we lost one somewhere.
No, up until they're like born, and then you know that normal, what was life before this child? Like, I can't even fathom life before you.
That is a weird phenomenon in my mind, how it's just like, oh, life is normal, everything's fine. And then you have another child and it's just boom. Like, how did we live life without you?
Well, we keep saying that whenever this baby is born, there is going to be a name that is going to be added to our vocabulary that we're going to say however many times a day that
for the rest of our
lives that we like currently don't say. Like every once in a while we'll mention like the baby's potential names, but since we don't know if it's a boy or girl, we don't refer to it by a name. We just say baby W or it, which is terrible. Yeah. Okay. Anyways. And then the final one was number 14 was fostering other children. And again, just what a beautiful sacrificial way of viewing this and recognizing that God has blessed some people and some families through foster care. And they recognize that these children require a lot of attention, and having another baby just might not be in the cards for you because of what God has called you to do here on earth. And so again, a unique situation, but definitely one that impacts families in our community here.
This next section is one of my favorite. The stories that come from this are almost always great. And that is surprise babies. Now, Bethany put up in her stories as well this question.
So the question was, did anyone decide they were done having children and then still end up pregnant, whether it was a surprise baby, a vasectomy reversal, change of mind, or heart? And so we went through again all of these responses and tried our very best to consolidate and put them into categories.
We have a change of heart, a vasectomy reversal, miscarriage and didn't want that to be the end of the story, ovulated outside of the cycle, God changed our hearts, decided to adopt a child, got pregnant on birth control, a condom broke, or a failed vasectomy.
I agree with you. These are always my favorite stories when you just hear about how man plans.
And God laughs.
And God comes in and is like, no, that's actually not how your story is going to end. You're going to have more children. And I mean, some of these are wild. Like some of the failed vasectomy stories that I have heard over my lifetime are just crazy. And you just go, wow, like God, he's not playing around. He said, you're going to have another child. Yeah. And this is how it's happening.
Yeah, that reminds me when I was younger, I knew this guy in a car group, and he had 2 kids. He and his wife decided that they were done. They got a vasectomy, and it was like cut a section out, soldered each end, done. And he then had 2 more kids after that.
It's wild. I mean, I know people personally who have gotten pregnant on birth control. I mean, even us, we have had some surprise pregnancies here where our children, by way of a calendar, should not be here. And I'm so thankful because God knew what our family needed. And, you know, I look at those children and I think, how in the world would our family be without them? I can't picture it at all. And I'm just so thankful because our minds are so finite and God's is the complete opposite of it. And he plans and he designs and he creates our families despite us.
So what does all this tell us? I mean, really, big picture, it tells us that everyone's story is going to be different. It points to and celebrates the difference in humans and how God is writing all of our stories so uniquely.
And maybe this is why this question is so popular, is because there is no cookie cutter response to it. We just polled how many people and got all of these responses, and they varied greatly. Going off this a little bit, I know that in the Christian community, there are a lot of families who say, our fertility is just up to God and whatever He wills we want, which we agree with, obviously, being God's plan and coming to prayer over this topic. But for some people, they just don't even follow a cycle. They say no to any type of birth control whatsoever. A vasectomy would obviously not even be part of their vocabulary. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about where Jake and I stand with that. We believe that God gave women monthly cycles, and those cycles can be tracked, and they can be tracked to decide when to be intimate and when to not be intimate. We are not pro like a hormonal birth control, a barrier method like condoms. That is something that we personally feel is okay. And so we don't just like go month by month and go, all right, whatever happens, happens. We do have, I guess, a plan, you would say. And I do track my cycle, which has obviously not always worked out exactly how we thought we wanted it to, but it has always worked out how God wanted it to. So I just wanted to touch on that topic. I think it's called open womb, and just share our thoughts on that. And yeah, we can continue on now.
Next, we're going to touch briefly on trusting God versus common sense. Like, what does faith look like in different situations? Now, obviously, this is going to differ from person to person, but God has given us common sense and logic, and we should use it wisely, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you come into like a near-death situation, having a child, and the doctors are saying like there's a really good chance this is going to happen to you again, stopping having kids at that point, I personally feel, is not living out of fear. It's using the common sense that God has given us, and He is using doctors to be able to say that. Now, I'm not going to say that I haven't heard amazing, crazy stories of how people have gotten pregnant after this and have had successful pregnancies. Like, I know those happen, but we're talking about this because we want it to be understood that there are going to be times where like God is going to call you to moments of faith of we are going to walk through this together, and other times where it's going to be common sense of this probably is not the right move for our family, and we are going to end having children to save the mother's life so that our current children have a mother.
And it might not even be something this drastic either. It could be something smaller that you just even pause for a time on having kids, and later on in life you can revisit it and come back to it.
Yeah, like we talked a lot about finances, we talked about mental capacity, and you in your human mind might think, I can't handle anymore. Like I am at capacity right now. But a year or two down the line, like as you mature and you grow in your parenting journey, your mind might change. And God might say, it's time for another child to enter into your family. And so we can't sit here and say, you're not trusting God enough, or you're not using common sense enough. Again, it's going to look so different from situation to situation, but understanding that there is a balance between those two. There's a line between those two.
And when something scary does happen in pregnancy, like you're going to have to work through some fear if you're going to have another child as well.
Well, and I know personally that's something that I've had to work through with this pregnancy after our last pregnancy with Story, and having an abnormal ultrasound and a growth growing with her. And then the week that she was born, a couple days before it, being rushed to the hospital because her heart rate was decelerating. And it was just situation after situation after situation for the second half of her pregnancy, where I just felt like I was living in this constant state of anxiety of what is going to happen with this baby. And I thought, I can't go through this mentally again. Like it's so hard for me. And praise God, she was born completely fine, she was born fine, and then she was rushed to the NICU a couple hours later. So it still didn't even end right away. She is fine today. She is healthy and a very rambunctious 2-year-old. But I remember thinking, like, this might be it. Like, we might be done at 5 kids. And we hadn't really discussed exactly how many kids we had planned to have at that time. She was very much a surprise pregnancy. And so when we got a surprise pregnancy again this time, I had no choice but to like really work through those remaining fears. And I had worked through a lot of it postpartum after her. But since this pregnancy currently was such a surprise, there was still some fears and anxieties that had not been dealt with and have come up now, being where I am, when we were having issues in the pregnancy with Story. And I have had no choice but to work through that and to trust God, to trust the facts of the pregnancy, to trust or to not trust my feelings and my fears, but to give it to God and say, okay, like you have clearly planned this child, because on paper, this child should not exist like on a calendar right now. But you have called us to have this 6th child. And so, and you have now called me to live in faith. So that is just my little testimony here. We're still working towards the full end of it as we await this baby's arrival.
And this is something that we're still talking through, praying through now, with this being another surprise pregnancy. There are those fears that we have to talk through and work out together. But it's one of those things. God has blessed us with another baby, and we are going to work through them.
I hope that if there is one thing you walk away today from this podcast, is knowing that prayer is essential to answering this question for your family. 1 John 5:14 says, "And this is the confidence that we have toward him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us." And I believe that's where we all want to be, is in God's will with a number of children for our family, knowing that the answer that you get and the answer that we get is likely not going to be the same answer. And there's a good chance it's not going to be revealed to us in the same way. There might be circumstances around us that answer it. It might be a direct answer from God, or that feeling of being complete. But as long as we are in prayer and we are seeking God and like asking for that clarity, and that comfort of just knowing, like resting in that knowledge of our time is done, we are complete, and not wondering, oh, should we have had one more? Because I hear that story a lot too, and it really breaks my heart when you run into like that older person in the supermarket or another family, and they say, we should have had one more kid. I really regret not having another kid. And I mean, nobody ever says that about having the other kid. I guess that would be a pretty terrible regret to have. But it just always strikes me every time I hear somebody say that. And I think, I don't want to regret not having that child I wondered if I should have. So we are going to leave you guys today. We just have lots of lists for you guys. But our final list is questions to ponder, preferably with your spouse.
That is usually the best way to do it.
As you, like if you're in this season of life of how many kids are we going to have? Perhaps you're at the other end and you are just starting to have kids right now, and this is not even something that is remotely on your radar at the moment. But if it is, let us leave you guys with this list. So question number 1 is, can you adequately provide? And I said we were going to talk about this again. And, what does provision look like? What does faith in God look like about being able to financially provide for your kids?
Being able to adequately provide is really going to depend on your definition of adequate, and being able to provide what you think is needed versus what is actually needed.
Right. Like there could be some families who are fully invested in having lessons every single week for all of their kids. They might want to provide full funding for college one day. And then on the reverse side, you have families like us who, I grew up in a family where we did not expect our parents to pay for our college. We knew that it was something we would have to take out student loans for, and we would be expected to pay back. Lessons for our kids. We do the best that we can, but it's not a priority for our family. And so I think it comes down to like, what are your priorities when it comes to finances? Like if you're just scraping by and having a hard time feeding the family that you have or having a house, then maybe it's not the time to be adding to your family right now.
The next question to ponder is, how is the wife's or the mother's health? And guys, this one is especially for us because we are called by God in Ephesians 5:29, and that says, "For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church." So what this is saying is, men, like, we need to protect our wives. Like, the husband might want another child, the wife might want another child, but if you're looking at it and going, there is a risk to losing my wife if we pursue this hope and dream for having another child. You need to, as the head of the house, you need to be able to look at it and say, you know what, having another child, if that's going to cause physical harm or death, you need to stop it because you're responsible to protect your wife and the children you already have. Genesis 1:28 says, "Be fruitful and multiply," but it doesn't say keep multiplying and never stop. So that is just something that you really need to be able to look at objectively and decide together whether or not you're going to pursue another child.
Question number 3 is, what is your capacity right now? And I want to challenge that question with, what is your capacity, but also what is God's capacity? Because we know that God is our strength in our weakness. And so when we come to God with prayer, asking for that wisdom of, do I just feel like I can't take on anymore? Or can I really not take on anymore? Or do I really need to rely on God right now? And God is calling us into a different part of our life, and that's adding another child. Or I'm relying on God's capacity right now for our family to go into ministry, as the one family said earlier.
Number 4 is, how are you stewarding the children given to you already? So, and with this one, we're going into like the spiritual aspect of it. We've already talked about providing financially, but this is, are you discipling your children? Are you in the Word with your children? Are you raising them up to be God-fearing Christians? Or are you being lackadaisical about it and not being that spiritual leader that your children need? Then that might be something that you need to think about and say, can we steward these children better? Can we continue to steward these children with more children? And once again, it is going to be a heart issue and just something you are going to need to pray and meditate on for a long time.
Question number 5 is, how are children impacting your marriage? Oftentimes children, it goes one way or the other. They are strengthening your marriage. You are a team. You are working together. Your children see that, and you guys are flourishing. And other times children come along and the marriage begins to disintegrate and fall apart. The parents are more focused on the kids. They're more focused on outside things, and they slowly begin to separate. And so if you're in that latter category, I would encourage you to start working on your marriage first before more children enter the picture.
Number 6 is talking about our motives and whether they're a me-centered motive or a God-centered motive. So if you're going, I don't want any more kids because I want to travel more, I want a newer car, and just being selfish, even though, God might have great plans with another child for you, you should definitely, obviously, trust God and rely on Him and not be so focused on yourself.
And these motives can go one way or the other. They can be focused on yourself or on God for wanting to stop or for wanting to continue. And so in both regards, like, you should be seeking God and checking your motives about, whichever scenario, whichever side of it you are on. Finally, the last question is, are you asking for insight and guidance from other Christians around you? And while this is a very personal matter, it's going to depend on you and your spouse, obviously, where you end up here. It is still a wise idea to gather information and guidance and help from other strong Christians who are around you. And just to ask them questions like, hey, we've been wondering if our family is complete or not, and this is kind of the direction we're leaning, and these are the reasons we're leaning this way. What are your thoughts? Because it's so valuable to hear insight from outside. It doesn't mean that you have to base your life off of their advice, but they might give you something else to think about in regards to this topic. Romans 14:5 says, one person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind.
I really like this verse because as you're asking for insight and guidance from other Christians, like, you need to also be aware that they might have biases. Like, one person might be like, oh yeah, you should have all the kids, don't stop having kids. And then another person is going to be like, well, you need to determine finances and all of that. So like, they can esteem things differently and encourage or heavily encourage one way or the other. But in the end, you must be fully convinced in your own mind. And ultimately, that is going to come down to you, your spouse, and God. And that wraps up our last list for this podcast. But we did want to leave you with one last verse of encouragement, and that is Psalms 127:3. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb, a reward. And no matter what, that is what we have to remember. We have to remember that children are a true gift from God. They are enormous blessings, bring so much joy to your life. No matter what, if you are keeping your sights on God and trusting and going to Him, He will provide, He will answer your questions. Thank you for joining us for another episode. As always, you can find us over on Instagram. The podcast is Whatever Is True Co. Bethany is at Waves and Lilacs, and I am at Jake Off Script.